Hello everybody, I'm Tim Cooper from National Parks at Night, and today I want to show you how to improve your night photography using Adobe Lightroom's Dehaze slider. But before we get into that, why don't you take a moment to subscribe below so you get to be the first to see our new videos when they come out. Alright, now Lightroom and Photoshop are chock full of amazing tools that help us improve our image. But there's one slider in particular that really stands out because it's so simple and easy to use. It's the Dehaze slider. It's kind of like the night photographer's secret weapon. It was introduced back in 2015 as part of their upgrades to their new cloud-based pricing structure. So if you're still using Lightroom 4 or 5 or 6, the standalone programs, this may induce you just to upgrade to the new cloud. It's worth it just for this one feature alone, plus the many other things that you get with it. Okay, so what exactly is the Dehaze filter or the Dehaze slider? Well, basically it's a smart way to add contrast. The regular contrast slider in Lightroom, what it does is it takes the center and pushes it out to either edge. So watch the histogram as I increase the contrast slider. You can see that the shadows are getting darker and the highlights are getting lighter. All right, well that works great for many images, but for night skies and for haze, what we really want to do is we want to reduce contrast we want to increase contrast in the low contrast areas. So this is a very low contrast area, and that's what I want to, quote, dehaze, unquote. So when I increase the contrast slider, you can see it just worsens the problem. All right, so what we'll do is we'll go down to find our Dehaze slider, and that's under Effects. All the way at the bottom, you'll see Dehaze. Now watch as I increase this slider. The back portion gains contrast, and the front portion stays relatively the same. All right, let's look at the before and after view. All right, so here we have both views looking just like one another, and watch this screen over here as I increase the Dehaze. You're going to see that most of the contrast occurs right in this area. So the Dehaze slider is sort of like adding smart contrast. It targets the areas of the scene that are already lower in contrast, and it concentrates its effect within that area. Now, it works on other things besides just haze, or in this case, smoke. If you look at this image, we have a waterfall, and we have our two images looking like one another before and after. And again, watch the low contrast areas up in here and the higher contrast areas down in here. I'll go to my Dehaze slider and slightly increase it. And you can see this area's picked up contrast, the waterfalls picked up contrast, and even the rainbows picked up contrast. This area has not been as affected. Now, it is affected a little bit, but most of the effect is right in here. So you can see that the Dehaze slider works wonderfully for increasing contrast in low contrast areas. But there is some things that we have to be cautious about. All right, one of those things is the addition of saturation that occurs. So when we go to an image like this was a very hazy scene looking out across the mountains in Glacier National Park. And we want to increase the Dehaze slider to pull out some detail in these mountains. So we'll move over to our Dehaze slider and begin to push it up. And if we push it up a little bit, not so bad. But as we increase it, the blue really starts to intensify in saturation. So the Dehaze slider, while adding contrast to the low contrast areas, also increases saturation. And it increases mostly in the blue. So you want to use kid gloves with this, people. You want to be very careful and just add little tiny bits of the Dehaze. Going too far is going to make the image look false. So for me, somewhere here around maybe about plus 28 looks good for this image. I wouldn't push it too much further. But again, notice the increase in contrast in the low contrast areas and the less increase in contrast in the already contrasty areas. Okay, one other thing we want to watch for is increasing this slider too much. So let's take an image like this, very, very hazy. We can simply move our dehaze slider up and add a little bit of contrast, and that really works nicely, that dehaze slider. But you go too much and it can really start looking false. Notice how the edges here have darkened in and it's gotten much more contrasty in the contrasty areas. So be careful. Once again, just kid gloves. Go light, easy touch, increase it a little bit. Now, what does all this have to do with night skies and night photography? Well, typically, our night skies are kind of low in contrast. We want to be able to bring out all of the stars, even the really dim ones. And if you were to measure the contrast between the sky here and the stars, it wouldn't be that much different. So by using the dehaze slider, what we're doing is increasing the contrast in that area. Plus, remember, it adds a little bit of saturation, and it adds saturation mostly to the blues. So the dehaze slider has all of the properties that we want to pull out of a night sky. So let's watch how easy this is. Go over to the dehaze slider and begin to pull it up. And instantly, you've got an image that is striking and the stars are really popping out. The Milky Way is like jumping out of the sky here. All right, so let's go back and let's do a before and after view. All right, now here's our before, here's our after, and we're going to add just a little bit of dehaze, and you can see the difference. The sky's a little bit more intense blue, the stars are popping out, and the Milky Way is just leaping from the sky. All right, now let's say that perhaps this is too intense for you. And you think, well, gosh, I kind of like the sky this more muted blue. Maybe this looks a little false. Some people like more saturation in the sky. Some people like a little bit less. So what we can do is a sort of a multi-pronged approach, right? Let's think about what's happening here. As we increase the dehaze, we are increasing saturation and it's actually darkening a little bit. So if it's darkening, we can go up and we can increase our exposure a little bit. And if the blue has become too saturated, then what we can do is we can go down to our HSL panel, go to saturation, click on our targeted adjustment for saturation, and now put our target adjustment over the blue, click and drag down. And now we're slowly decreasing the saturation. You can see it's starting to get closer to the one on the left. Now I'm not going to go as far. I want to leave a little bit of that color saturation in there. All right, about there. So I went to -33 on the blue. Now, look at our images. Doesn't this sky look much more striking? Simply because we added the dehaze, and then the dehaze darkened and oversaturated. So we lightened the image and slightly desaturated to take care of that, and we're left with an image that is similar in color, more intense. All right, let's look at that again on an image like this. All right, we've got before, we've got after. So we go to our effects and we increase the dehaze. Now in this case, you can see the foreground, the mountains and the lake have really picked up a lot of color, more saturation, and they've gotten darker as well. And perhaps you don't want it to get that dark. Well, you can also apply this in a way that's just local to the sky. So let me take my amount and double click that. That brings it back to 0. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go up and grab a graduated filter and increase the dehaze. Make sure everything else is at 0. If you want to make sure everything's at 0, you can double click effect, then increase your dehaze button. And then I'm simply going to drag, I'm going to click and then drag down. And there's the gradient. And here's where the effect is fully happening. So I'll just readjust that by grabbing. Now, once we've drawn out our gradient, we can very easily come back and readjust our dehaze filter. So let's make this, let's make it a little bit strong here. And now at this point, we've increased contrast and saturation. So we'll take our saturation and pull that back a little bit. And we'll take our exposure and lighten that up a little bit just so our sky's not quite so dark. And of course, that's a matter of taste. If you liked it that dark, that is fine. But I'm just going to try to get it back to closer to the original so that you can see what the dehaze filter has done. So that's roughly the same brightness with a little bit of saturation and a lot more stars popping out because you've used the Dehaze filter. So this slider is fantastic, folks, whether you're doing it globally or whether you're doing it locally. But it works even not just for stars, but even for, let's say, clouds. So let me get out of this and I'll show you one more example. All right. This is an image that I shot with Lance Kymeg, one of our partners, and we were down in the Alabama hills in California on a workshop. And I love the sky. This was a very long exposure. You can see it was 4 minutes in length. And so the clouds are streaking across the sky. And I want to bring those clouds out a little bit more. I want to make those streaks a little more prominent. So if I go and add the dehaze, whoa, the sky gets pretty cool, but it also adds a lot of contrast to this part of the image. Now again, this is a personal preference. You may like that added contrast. For me, I want to keep it a little bit more local to the sky. So what I'm going to do is going to go up and grab a brush and double click effect to reset these, increase the dehaze. And what I'm going to do is make sure auto mask is on, and I want to see where I'm painting. So I'm going to click on show selected mask overlay. Now I'm just going to paint in this mask and stay close to the edges. The auto mask will kind of track those edges. And I'm not afraid to zoom in a little bit, paint closer around those edges and make my brush smaller so I can get up around the nooks and crannies of that rock. And I won't spend too much time doing this, just so we don't waste our time during the video, but at home you could certainly take as much time as you want to be hyper accurate. All right, let's call that good. Now you can see I went out of the lines a little bit here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit my erase button, and I'm just going to go ahead and erase that section there. All right, good enough for now. All right, to see my effect, I'll remove my show selected mask overlay, and you can see, whoa, the sky really jumped out because my dehaze is so high there. So first of all, I noticed there's a little bit of missing edges up here, so I'll just paint that in. And now I'll go back and readdress my dehaze filter. So I'll just pull it up a little bit. All right, now that sky is much more intense, but it's darkened a little bit, right? So once again, I'll go to my exposure, brighten that exposure a little bit. And if I feel the saturation was too much, I will go and reduce my saturation to about there. All right, now you can see I've got a little glowing around the edges because I didn't paint very carefully, and of course you can take more time than I did when you're doing that. But let's look at the difference now with before and after. We've really brought out the streaks in the sky by applying the dehaze filter locally with the adjustment brush. So the dehaze filter, the night photographer's secret weapon. It's an awesome tool, easy to use. If you want to learn more about these local adjustments that I've been showing you and how to apply local adjustments to your night photography, tune in for later episodes of this blog. I'm going to start at the beginning and show how all of the local adjustments work. So thanks a lot for watching, everybody. And we always welcome constructive feedback. So if you feel so inclined, drop us a note in the comments section below. And while you're down there, don't forget to like and subscribe. You may also want to consider signing up for our weekly blog posts at nationalparksatnight.com/blog. They're super informative. And if you're really inspired, check out our workshops at nationalparksatnight.com. They're a ton of fun. I think you'll love them. Again, I'm Tim Cooper, and thanks again for joining us. So thanks for tuning in, everybody. And remember, carpe noctem.